Ethan had been riding for hours under the warm afternoon sun, guiding his tired horse along the dusty trail that cut between two long stretches of dry grassland. He had spent the last 2 days in town buying supplies, and had been looking forward to getting back home to the quiet of his ranch. He was a simple man, not one who talked much or looked for company. The world had taught him silence, and silence had become his closest companion. But that day, silence was broken when he noticed something on the trail that made him pull the reins tight and stop his horse. Up ahead stood a broken wagon. One of the wheels had snapped clean off, leaving the whole thing leaning to one side like a wounded animal. The horses were nowhere in sight. Maybe they ran off after the accident, or maybe something else had scared them away. Ethan felt the familiar weight of caution settle in his chest. A broken wagon, alone in the wilderness, usually meant trouble. He slowly guided his horse closer, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. He didn't expect to see anyone alive, but then he heard it. A small, weak sound, like a breath mixed with fear. He stepped down from his horse immediately. There, beside the fallen wagon, sat a little girl no older than 9 or 10. Her hair was tangled and dusty, her face streaked with dried tears. She looked exhausted, like she had cried until her voice gave out. Her clothes were torn at the edges, and her knees were scratched from kneeling on the rough ground. She didn't say anything. She only looked at him with wide, tired eyes that held more pain than a child should ever know. Beside her lay a still figure covered with a blanket that had once been white but was now brown from dirt and travel. Ethan knew in one glance that the woman beneath it, her mother, most likely was gone. The girl's small shoulders were tense, and she looked ready to run or hide, even though she didn't have the strength to move. Ethan didn't come close at first. He understood fear. He had lived with enough of it to recognize the shape in someone's eyes. Instead, he crouched a short distance away, slowly removed his hat, and placed it against his chest. He spoke softly, his voice gentle and steady, as if his words were carried on a breeze instead of force. "My name's Ethan," he said. "I ain't here to hurt you. I just want to help." The girl blinked but didn't reply. Her lips were dry and cracked, and her hands were shaking. Ethan could see the empty water bucket near the wagon. She must have been stranded for hours, maybe even since the night before. Her mother must have passed earlier, leaving her alone on the trail with no food, no shelter, and no one to protect her. Ethan slowly reached into his saddlebag and brought out a small flask of water. He placed it gently on the ground between them, then backed away so she wouldn't feel pressured. After a long moment, the girl reached for it with trembling fingers. She drank too fast at first, coughing as water slipped down her throat. But she didn't stop. Ethan let her drink as much as she needed. When she was done, she held the flask close to her chest like it was something precious. Ethan stepped closer, this time without speaking. He looked at the blanket-covered body, and then at the girl. She followed his gaze and lowered her head. Her chin quivered, but no tears came out. She must have cried herself empty. Ethan gently lifted a corner of the blanket to confirm what he already knew. Then he lowered it again and closed his eyes for a short moment of respect. He spoke softly again. "I'm sorry." She made a soft sound, but her voice still refused to form words. Ethan knew he couldn't leave them there. The wolves would come at night, and the girl wouldn't survive alone, even an hour, after dusk. Carefully, he moved to the other side of the blanket and wrapped the woman's body more tightly. He had buried strangers before frontier life. He didn't give people the luxury to look away from death, but this was different. The girl was watching every movement, her eyes growing shiny again. Ethan wished he could take away her pain, but all he could do was treat her mother with the dignity she deserved. He turned back to the girl and offered his hand, not forcing anything, just giving her a choice. She stared at his rough, calloused hand for a long moment before her tiny fingers slowly hesitantly, reached out. She let him lift her, though she winced from soreness. Ethan carefully placed her on his horse, making sure she was seated securely. She grabbed onto his shirt, holding on with surprising strength. That small gesture struck him deeper than he expected. Locroots. She was clinging to him not because he was strong, but because he was the only thing left. Before leaving, Ethan looked around the area one last time. He searched the wagon for any clues about who they were. Papers, names, anything. But the wagon held only simple belongings. Blankets, a little wooden doll, a few pots, and a torn map. There was no sign of a father or anyone else. It seemed the woman and child had been traveling alone. With one arm around the girl to keep her steady, Ethan guided the horse away from the broken wagon. He would return later to bury the mother properly, but he needed to get the girl somewhere safe first. She leaned against him, her head resting on his chest, as her small hand stayed tightly wrapped in his shirt. Ethan felt her shaking fear. Cold. Hunger. He couldn't tell. Maybe all three. He said nothing, but he kept his arm firm around her, offering the wordless comfort only a steady presence can give. The journey back to his ranch took an hour. The girl didn't speak the entire time. At one point, she lifted her head slightly and looked back at the trail behind them, her eyes filling with emotions she couldn't express. Ethan gently turned her face forward so she wouldn't torment herself with memories. She didn't resist. Instead, she pressed her forehead against his chest again and closed her eyes. When they reached the ranch, Ethan slid off the horse first and then lifted her down. Her legs wobbled when they touched the ground. Without thinking, Ethan steadied her with both hands. She looked up at him, unsure, trying to read his face. Ethan wasn't good with facial expressions. He usually kept his feelings hidden, but he made sure she saw something calm, something steady, something safe. "Let's get you inside," he whispered. He pushed the door open and let her step in first. She hesitated, her eyes scanning the simple interior, the wooden table, the fireplace, the worn-out chair, the neatly folded blankets. Everything in Ethan's home was practical and arranged quietly. She stepped inside slowly, almost as if expecting someone to scold her for entering. Ethan lit the lantern and warmed some food. The girl sat silently on the edge of a chair, her hands folded in her lap. When he placed the bowl of warm soup in front of her, she looked at it first, then at him, as if asking permission. He nodded gently. She began eating with small spoonfuls at first, then faster when she realized she didn't have to save any for later. Ethan watched her, making sure she didn't choke. When she finished, she whispered something so quietly Ethan almost missed it. "Thank you." It was the first word she had spoken. Her voice was soft, barely more than a breath, but it held the weight of everything she had been through. Ethan felt something shift inside him, not pity, but a responsibility he didn't ask for, yet couldn't ignore. A responsibility he accepted without hesitation. As night settled outside, he gave her his own bed to sleep in. She lay down slowly, touching the blanket as if it was the softest thing she had ever felt. Ethan stayed nearby, sitting in the old chair, watching over her until her breathing steadied and she drifted into sleep. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel alone in his home. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the girl slept without fear, trusting the silent cowboy who had stopped on the trail when no one else did. The next morning, Ethan woke early as usual, long before the sun climbed over the hills. He had slept lightly in the chair beside the bed, waking several times to make sure the young girl was still resting peacefully. She hadn't moved much during the night, and her breathing had stayed soft and steady. It was the kind of sleep that came only after exhaustion had swept through her whole body. Ethan stretched quietly, careful not to wake her. For a moment, he simply watched the small rise and fall of her breath under the blanket. She looked different now that she was clean, safe, and fed. Her face, though tired, showed hints of gentleness. and he wondered how long she had been carrying fear on her shoulders. He didn't know her story, only the ending of it, and that was enough to understand how deep her wounds must be. Ethan stepped outside to feed the animals. The cold morning air touched his face as he walked toward the barn. His ranch was simple but peaceful, the kind of place where mornings were quiet, aside from the soft whinnies of horses and the gentle clucking of chickens. As he worked, he kept thinking about the girl inside the house. He had always been alone by choice, but now he had someone depending on him, even if just for a little while. And he wasn't sure how long that little while would be. When he returned to the house, he found her awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, with the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. She looked startled when the door opened, but calmed when she realized it was him. Her eyes were softer today, though still carrying shadows that would take time to fade. "You hungry?" She nodded. He warmed up breakfast, simple eggs and bread, but she looked at the food like it was more than a meal. She ate carefully, taking small bites like she wasn't used to having food freely available. Ethan didn't rush her. Looked racked. 2-3. He sat at the table with her, letting the silence stay comfortable. After a few minutes, she finally spoke again. Her voice small. "My name is Lily." Ethan repeated the name softly, letting it settle in the room. "Lily. That's a good name." She looked relieved that he accepted it. Names held weight, especially when everything else had been taken away from her. After she finished eating, she watched Ethan clean up the dishes. She didn't move from the spot, almost as if she was afraid that if she left his sight, she would lose her place in this quiet house. When he noticed her sitting stiffly, he pointed gently toward the wooden chair by the fireplace. "You can sit there if you want," he said. She walked over slowly and sat with her legs tucked under the blanket. The fire warmed her face, making her eyes softer. For the first time, she seemed comfortable enough to look around the room without fear. Ethan could tell she was taking in every detail: the shelves, the table, the tools hanging near the door. Everything here was simple, but it was safe. A short while later, Ethan walked outside to continue chores. Lily followed him, stepping very quietly, like someone used to being careful. She stayed a few steps behind, watching him work but not interrupting. When he noticed her standing by the doorway with her hands tucked under her chin, he gave her a small gesture to come closer. She did. Slowly. He handed her a small bucket of grain. "You can help feed the chickens," he said softly. Her eyes widened, almost surprised he trusted her with something. She followed him to the coop, watching carefully as he opened the gate. When she scattered the grain on the ground, the chickens hurried forward, clucking and pecking. Lily giggled an actual small giggle, and Ethan paused, surprised, and quietly glad. It was the first sound of joy he'd heard from her. "You did good," Ethan said. She looked up, smiling shyly, and something in that moment eased the tight knot inside his chest. He had not heard a child's laugh on his ranch for years, not since his younger days before solitude became his way of living. For the rest of the morning, Lily stayed close. She followed him from the barn to the shed, watching him fix tools and check on the fences. Sometimes she sat on a wooden stool, swinging her legs gently. Other times, she held small items. He handed her nails, pieces of rope, a brush for the horse. She didn't speak much, but her eyes began to find life again. Ethan didn't push her to talk. He let things unfold naturally, giving her the quiet company she needed. Around noon, he noticed her staring at the hillside behind the ranch. He knew what she was thinking. Her mother was still there, still waiting to be laid to rest. Ethan walked over and knelt beside her. "We'll make a place for her today," he said gently. Lily pressed her lips together and nodded. She wasn't ready to see her mother again, but she understood the meaning behind his words. Ethan saddled the horse and lifted her up carefully. He tied extra blankets to the side, along with tools he'd need for the burial. The journey back to the broken wagon was slow and quiet. Lily held onto Ethan's shirt just like before. But this time, her hold was less of fear and more of steady reassurance. She wasn't alone anymore. When they reached the wagon, Lily's breath trembled. Ethan didn't rush. He lifted her down and let her stand while he prepared a place for the grave. The area nearby had soft, undisturbed earth, not too rocky, not too dry. He dug slowly, respectfully, making sure the resting place was peaceful. Lily stood a few steps away, holding her wooden doll close to her chest. She was silent. But her silence wasn't emptiness, it was memory. Ethan moved the body with care, wrapping the blanket tighter and placing her mother gently in the ground. He stepped aside so Lily could approach if she wished. She walked forward slowly, kneeling beside the grave. Her fingers brushed the blanket one last time. She whispered something, but Ethan didn't try to hear. It was her moment. When she was ready, she nodded at him. Ethan covered the grave, smoothing the earth and placing small stones on top to keep it safe. He searched the wagon and found a wooden board. With his knife, he carved the simplest words he could. A good mother. Loved and remembered. He set the board at the head of the grave. Lily traced the carved letters with her finger, tears slipping down quietly. Ethan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Not pushing, not pulling. Just steady. She leaned against him, letting her grief flow without fear of judgment. When she finished crying, she wiped her face and whispered, "Thank you." They rode back slowly. The afternoon sun warmed the air, drying the tears on her cheeks. Lily fell asleep against Ethan's chest, her small hand clutching his sleeve. Ethan kept one arm lightly around her, guiding the horse carefully so she wouldn't wake or fall. As he rode, he realized how natural it felt to protect her. It wasn't something he planned or chose. It was something that had settled into his heart quietly. When they reached the house again, Ethan carried her inside and let her rest on the bed. She woke later in the evening and wandered outside to find him sitting on the porch. She sat beside him without hesitation, leaning slightly against his arm. "Do I have to leave?" she asked softly. "No," Ethan replied. "Not unless you want to." She shook her head quickly. I want to stay." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. The girl who had been alone and broken just yesterday now wanted to remain by his side. He nodded slowly. "Then you stay." Lily smiled a gentle, grateful smile and rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time since he had found her, she seemed at peace. And for the first time in many years, Ethan felt like his quiet ranch was no longer empty. It held something warm now, something living, trusting, and hopeful. Something he would protect. Weeks had passed since Ethan found Lily on the trail, and the ranch had slowly begun to feel different. It was no longer only the quiet sound of wind against the wooden walls or the low calls of animals in the barn. Now, there were gentle footsteps, soft humming, and the presence of a child who tried her best to be brave every day. Ethan noticed the change even before he admitted it to himself. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to share his space with another human being, especially someone so small and in need of gentle care. Every morning, Lily woke up before Ethan could call her. She was always careful, as though afraid of causing trouble. She folded the blanket neatly on the bed, cleaned the wooden table with her little hands, and waited quietly until Ethan finished his morning chores. She did not speak much, but her eyes often followed him around the room, watching his movements with a mixture of trust and curiosity. Sometimes he'd look over his shoulder and find her peeking through the doorway, her small head tilted to one side. When he caught her watching, she'd smile shyly and disappear behind the corner, only to peek out again a moment later. One morning, when Ethan walked out to check on the horses, he found Lily sitting on the fence, swinging her legs gently. She held the wooden doll she had brought from the broken wagon, now cleaned and wrapped with a fresh piece of cloth Ethan had given her. She hugged it closely, as though it still carried a piece of her mother with it. "You're up early," Ethan said softly. Lily nodded. "I don't like sleeping too long. It makes me think too much." Ethan understood. Night was when memories returned the loudest, and thoughts wandered where one didn't want them to go. He didn't push her to say more. Instead, he saddled his horse and invited her to join him at the barn. She followed him quietly, her feet brushing through the morning dust. Ethan began showing her simple, safe tasks: brushing the horse's mane, collecting eggs from the chicken coop, carrying water in a small bucket. Lily tried to help with everything. Sometimes she stumbled, sometimes she spilled water. But she always looked up at Ethan afterward, ready to try again. Ethan never raised his voice or showed disappointment. He praised her small successes and guided her gently through mistakes. Slowly, the girl who once trembled at every sound began to show confidence. One afternoon, while Ethan fixed a broken fence post, he looked up to see Lily gathering small stones beneath a tree. She arranged them in neat lines, then rearranged them in circles. When he asked what she was doing, she whispered, "I'm making a garden for Mama. She always liked flowers." He crouched beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We can plant real flowers there," he said. Lily's face brightened at once. "Really?" "Really," he replied. She hugged him lightly around the waist before running back to her stones. Ethan stayed still for a moment, surprised by the warmth of her hug. He had not expected such affection, but he realized how much it meant to her to have someone who didn't disappear. As days turned into weeks, their routines became a rhythm. Lily began laughing more, the kind of soft, surprised laughter that came from discovering joy again. She laughed when the chickens chased each other, when a horse tickled her palm with its nose, when Ethan accidentally splashed water on himself while washing tools. Each time she laughed, Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction. Her laughter made the ranch feel alive. But healing was not a straight path. Some nights, Ethan would hear Lily whimper in her sleep, whispering for her mother or crying silently into her pillow. He never entered the room suddenly. Instead, he sat outside the door until she calmed, or until she called out softly for him. When she did, he would enter, sit beside her, and speak gently until she felt safe again. He never asked her to forget or to hide her feelings. He simply stayed. And sometimes that was all a child needed. One evening, a heavy storm rolled across the sky, filling the air with dark clouds and distant rumbles. Lily had been playing with her doll on the porch when the first clap of thunder struck. She froze instantly. Her small body stiffened, and panic filled her eyes. She dropped the doll and rushed to Ethan, grabbing his arm tightly. "Don't let it happen again," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ethan knelt beside her. "You're safe. Nothing's going to happen." But she couldn't stop trembling. The storm reminded her of the night the wagon broke, the night everything changed. Ethan gently lifted her into his arms and carried her inside the house. He sat in the old wooden chair, keeping her close as she hid her face in his shirt. Every time thunder rolled through the sky, she squeezed her eyes shut, clinging to him. Ethan stroked her hair, slowly. He began telling her stories, simple ones from his childhood. About fishing in the old creek. About climbing trees and falling out of them. About the horse he raised when he was a boy. His quiet voice wrapped around her fear like a warm blanket. As the storm grew louder, he spoke even softer, grounding her with each word. Eventually, she pulled away from his shirt and looked up at him. "Your stories, they make the thunder feel far," she whispered. He smiled gently. "Good. We'll keep the thunder far." Lily stayed in his arms until the storm ended. When the sky finally quieted, she lifted her head and gave him a small, tired smile. That moment marked a shift. She had learned that not every loud noise meant danger anymore. not when someone strong and steady sat beside her. A few days later, neighbors came by the ranch for supplies and conversation. They were surprised to see Lily, a small girl with braided hair, opening the door and greeting them shyly. She stayed behind Ethan when new people came near, though she peeked curiously from behind his arm. Some neighbors asked questions where she came from, what happened to her mother, why she was staying with Ethan. But Ethan gave short answers and protected Lily from anything too painful. He didn't feel the need to explain his choices to anyone. The girl needed a home, and he had one to give. One neighbor, Mrs. Clayton, a kind older woman, crouched down to Lily's height and gave her a small ribbon for her hair. Lily accepted it with wide eyes and thanked her politely. After they left, she looked at Ethan as if asking if it was really all right for her to keep it. "It's yours," he said. She tied it around her doll first, then around her own hair, then back around the doll again, trying to decide who needed it more. Ethan chuckled quietly. Lily beamed as if she had made the right choice every time. Over the next few weeks, the girl began to feel more at home. She started humming while helping in the barn, singing soft tunes she remembered from long ago. She drew small pictures in the dirt with a stick, flowers, mountains, a little house that looked very much like Ethan's ranch. She wrote her mother's name near the drawings, and next to it, she always added a little heart. One afternoon, Ethan saw her sitting beside the hill where her mother was buried. She wasn't crying. She was talking softly, telling her mother about her day, how she fed the chickens, how she learned to brush a horse, how she liked the way Ethan cooked potatoes. Ethan stood at a distance, so he wouldn't interrupt. He watched her from the porch with quiet respect. Lily finished talking and looked toward him. She didn't hide her grief anymore. She walked over and took his hand without speaking. Ethan squeezed her hand gently, and together they walked back to the house. By now, Lily trusted him completely. She trusted him to protect her, to guide her, to listen without judgment. And Ethan, who once believed he was meant to live alone, realized how much he cared for her far more than he ever expected. She had become part of his life, filling the empty spaces he never acknowledged. Every evening, they sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. Lily would rest her head on Ethan's arm, watching the soft colors of the sky. She talked more now about her memories, about her dreams, about things she wanted to learn. Ethan listened to every word. Sometimes he shared stories. Sometimes they stayed silent. Both kinds of moments were good. Life was changing for both of them, gently, quietly, without force. And although neither of them knew what the future held, one thing was already certain. The quiet cowboy and the little girl had begun to build something together. Something warm, fragile, and strong. Something that felt like family. As months passed, the ranch slowly changed from a lonely stretch of land into a place filled with small footsteps, soft laughter, and the gentle presence of a child learning to live again. Lily had grown stronger, more confident, and more comfortable with every passing day. She still had moments of sadness, but they no longer crushed her. She still had memories that brought tears to her eyes, but she no longer faced them alone. Ethan had become the steady figure in her life, someone she trusted without question. Ethan noticed these changes even in the smallest details. Lily now woke with curiosity instead of fear. She walked with purpose instead of hesitation. She smiled more freely, especially when she managed to help him with something around the ranch. When she fed the chickens, or brushed the horse, or swept the porch, she did it with pride. She wanted to contribute, to be useful, to belong. And to Ethan, she already did. One warm afternoon, Ethan and Lily were fixing a loose gate near the barn when they heard the sound of horses approaching from afar. Ethan stood up straight, listening carefully. Visitors didn't come often, and usually only when they had a reason. Lily tensed beside him. her hands gripping her dress nervously. The memory of strangers still stirred fear in her heart. "It's all right," Ethan said softly. "I'm right here." Two riders appeared over the hill. When they reached the ranch, they introduced themselves as officials from the county. One was a middle-aged man with kind eyes. The other was a woman carrying a leather notebook. They had heard about the wagon accident and had finally traced the report back to Ethan's ranch. They weren't here for trouble, but regulations required them to check on the child who had survived. Lily stood behind Ethan, gripping the back of his shirt. She kept her eyes lowered, avoiding theirs. The woman spoke gently. "We just want to make sure she's safe and cared for." Ethan nodded. "She is." The officials looked around the ranch, the clean yard, the well-kept home, the quiet, peaceful environment. They noticed the small touches that proved Ethan's care. The clean clothes drying on the line, the neatly made bed inside the house, the little stones arranged around a new garden patch Lily had created for her mother. They asked Lily if she wanted to speak to them. She shook her head and stepped even closer to Ethan. Her grip tightened. The woman crouched down, giving her space, and spoke softly. "You don't have to be scared. We only want to help," Lily finally whispered. "I want to stay." The woman exchanged a glance with the other official. "Stay with him?" she asked gently. Lily nodded firmly. She didn't hide behind Ethan anymore. She stepped out slightly, holding Ethan's hand like it was something solid that kept her anchored to the world. The man closed his notebook. "Well, I think we can see she's in good hands." They explained that Ethan could apply to become her legal guardian. They needed documents, signatures, and a few visits to town. Lily listened closely. And when they asked her who she felt safe with, she pointed at Ethan without hesitation. After the officials left, Lily looked up at Ethan, worry flickering in her eyes. Ethan knelt in front of her. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief. She threw her arms around him and held on tightly. Ethan wrapped his arms around her too, steady and warm. Over the next few weeks, Ethan handled the paperwork. He rode into town several times, meeting the officials, answering questions, filling forms, and proving he could provide for the girl. People in town whispered about him as he walked into the courthouse, a quiet, solitary cowboy, becoming guardian to a little girl. Some were surprised, some curious, but most were supportive. Everyone knew Ethan's character, even if he didn't speak much. He was known as honest, gentle, and dependable. Meanwhile, Lily waited at the ranch, helping however she could. She cleaned the house, arranged her garden stones, and fed the animals daily. She made a little drawing of the ranch house with crayons Mrs. Clayton had given her, and she kept it on the table for Ethan to see when he returned. She wanted him to know she belonged there, that this ranch was her home now too. When the day finally came, Ethan brought home a small envelope with official papers tucked inside. He sat on the porch where Lily was playing with her doll. She looked up as he approached and immediately stood, searching his face for answers. Ethan handed her the envelope. She opened it slowly, her hands shaking. She couldn't read all the words clearly, but she recognized her own name and Ethan's name together on the same page. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "What does it mean?" she whispered. Ethan knelt beside her. "It means you're staying with me for good. I'm your guardian now." For a moment, Lily froze, as if the words felt too big to understand. Then, her eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from a happiness so strong, it made her chest shake. She threw herself into Ethan's arms and held on tightly. "You're my family," she said in a trembling voice. Ethan held her just as firmly. "And you're mine." From that day forward, the ranch felt different in a new way. Lily didn't move carefully anymore, afraid of being a burden. She walked through the house freely, humming as she cleaned. singing softly when she brushed the horses. She helped Ethan with bigger tasks, carrying wood, washing the porch, planting seeds. Her garden for her mother grew with wildflowers of different colors, each one chosen with love. Ethan often watched her from a distance, seeing the strength she had gained. She had grown from a frightened child on the trail into a brave, smiling girl who had found a safe place to belong. She still visited her mother's grave often, speaking softly to her, telling her about her day, her dreams, and her new life. Ethan always gave her space but stayed within reach, knowing she found comfort in his presence. One evening, after a long day of chores, Ethan sat on the porch as usual. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink. Lily climbed into the wooden rocking chair beside him, hugging her doll close. "Ethan," she said quietly, "do you think Mama can see me?" He looked at her gently. "I think she sees everything you're becoming, and I think she's proud of you." Lily smiled, wiping a small tear from her cheek. "I hope so." She rested her head on his shoulder. The wind blew softly through the grass, carrying the peaceful sounds of the ranch. The horses settled in the barn. The chickens clucked softly in their coop. And the world felt calm, something Lily had not felt for a very long time. Ethan placed a steady hand on her back. "You're safe here. Always." Lily closed her eyes, letting those words settle into her heart like warm sunlight. And so the quiet cowboy who once lived alone found himself with a little girl who filled his days with purpose, hope, and gentle joy. He had saved her on the trail, but in many ways, she had saved him too. Together, they built a life from broken pieces, kindness, trust, and love, shaping every day into something new. The girl who once lay beside her mother on the lonely trail now had a family, a home, and a future. And the silent cowboy who once thought he had nothing left to give now knew that his heart had room for something he never expected. They had found each other when they both needed someone the most. And neither of them would ever be alone again.